"Take it," she said, holding out the last container of the night. "Please." He didn't look up right away. He never did on the first time. But when he finally lifted his head, she saw what she always saw in people who hadn't been seen in a long time: surprise, raw and quiet, the kind that comes not from shock but from being recognized. "That's your supper," he said. "Maybe," she said, "but you look like you need it more." She walked back to her cart. She didn't wait for him to thank her. He came back the next day and the day after that. For 40 days, Akosua gave that man her last container of kelewele and rice. For 40 days, he sat on the same bench outside the community center and ate without asking for anything else. On the 41st day, a black Cadillac Escalade pulled up to the curb on Ranee Avenue, and a woman in a gray blazer stepped out and held the door open. The man stood. He brushed the snow from his coat. He walked toward the car. But before he got in, he turned around. He looked at Akosua, and when he opened his mouth and spoke, she pressed her hand to her chest like something inside her had shifted. Now, before I tell you what he said, check that subscribe button. If you believe that what you give in your worst season comes back to you in your best one, then this story was made for you. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because what happens next on this corner in Scarborough, Ontario is going to stay with you for a very long time. Let me take you back to where it all began. Akosua Barima was 32 years old, and she made the best kelewele in all of Toronto, maybe in all of Ontario, not that anyone with money had noticed yet. Her cart was a second-hand converted trailer that her cousin helped her paint a deep terracotta red. She parked it on the edge of the community center lot every Tuesday through Saturday, set up by 10 in the morning, and sold until the last container was gone. She made kelewele, fried plantain spiced with ginger and cloves and a pinch of cayenne, and waki, the rice and beans dish her grandmother had cooked every Sunday morning in Kumasi before they came to Canada. She made Contamire stew thick enough to stand a spoon in, and groundnut soup that people drove across the city for. Everything she cooked smelled like something worth staying for. She had set up on that particular corner 3 years ago, after her shift supervisor at the food processing plant in Etobicoke told her she was a little too much personality for the floor. She hadn't argued. She'd gone home, told her grandmother, and Maame Afi had laughed so hard she had to hold her sides. "Good," Maame Afi said. "They did you a favor. Go cook for people who can taste what you're doing." So she did. Her cart wasn't much. A generator, 2 burners, a deep fryer she'd bought secondhand from a restaurant in Brampton. But what came out of it was extraordinary. She had a permit, the basic street food vendor license the city required, and she renewed it every year. She set up, she cooked, she sold, she packed up. Every day the same rhythm. She lived with Maame Afi in a 2-bedroom apartment on Falstaff Avenue, the kind of apartment where the radiators knocked and hissed all winter, and the superintendent took 2 weeks to fix anything that broke. It was not glamorous, but it was theirs. Maame Afi was 74. She had raised Akosua alone after Akosua's mother died in a road accident outside Accra when Akosua was 9 years old. She had brought Akosua to Canada on a family sponsorship visa when Akosua was 15, both of them arriving at Pearson International Airport on a February morning with 2 suitcases and a tin of biscuits for the journey. Mom, the teenage Akosua had said, standing at the arrival's window staring at all that gray Canadian sky. "Is it always this cold?" "It is always this cold," Maame Afi had said cheerfully, "so we will be warm people in a cold place." And they were. But 3 years ago, Maame Afi was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and early-stage kidney disease. Her medication, the combination that kept her stable, cost nearly $900 a month after the provincial drug benefit covered its portion. Her mobility had declined. She could no longer take the TTC alone. She needed weekly rides to the clinic in North York, the careful diet, the compression stockings, the blood sugar monitoring supplies. Akosua paid for all of it. She paid for it from the cart, from the kelewele and the wakai and the Contamire stew. She tracked every dollar. She knew to the cent what she spent on plantain each week, what the vegetable oil cost, what the groundnuts ran her. She knew her margin, and she knew it was thin. Most evenings, by the time she packed up the cart, she had 1 container left, her portion. The meal she had set aside for herself at noon, the one that was hers, her dinner. The only thing standing between her and going to bed on an empty stomach. She was 20 minutes from home when she first saw the man on the bench. It was a Tuesday in mid-October, and the wind was already carrying that particular Toronto edge, the kind that finds every gap in your coat. He was sitting outside the community center, no hat, an old parka that had seen too many winters, his hands folded on his knees. He was not asleep. He was watching the street with the calm, unhurried attention of a man who had nowhere else to be and no particular need to pretend otherwise. Akosua loaded her cart for the short drive home. She looked at the man, she looked at her last container, she looked at the man again. Her grandmother's voice came to her, as it often did at inconvenient moments. Akosua, you cannot carry a bowl of water through a desert and arrive with dry lips and call that generosity. Real giving costs you something. She crossed the parking lot. Excuse me, she said. He looked up. He was older than she'd first thought, mid-60s perhaps, with close-cut gray hair, dark skin, with the particular depth of someone who had spent years in warmer sun before coming north. His face was composed, not guarded, not broken, just patient. The kind of patient that comes from having waited a long time for something and having made peace with the waiting. His eyes were dark and alert, not the eyes of a man who had given up on anything. Here, Akosua said, holding out the container. Kelewele and waki, spicy, but not too much. He looked at the container, then at her. That's yours, he said. It was, she said, now it's yours. Why? She shrugged. Because you're here and I have it. That's a good enough reason. He took the container. He held it in both hands like it had weight. Thank you, he said. His voice was deliberate, each word chosen carefully. You're welcome, she turned to go. What's your name, he asked. She turned back, Akosua. He nodded slowly as if filing it somewhere. My name is Mawuli, just Mawuli for now. She raised an eyebrow at for now but didn't ask. She walked back to her cart. When she glanced over her shoulder before pulling out of the lot, Mawuli was eating, slowly, with his eyes closed. She drove home. Her stomach was empty. She made herself a piece of toast with groundnut paste and told herself she wasn't hungry. She was hungry. But something else sat alongside the hunger, something lighter. She recognized it. Her grandmother had a name for it. She called it the fullness that has nothing to do with food. Mawuli was there the next day, same bench, same coat. By the end of the first week, it was a routine. Akosua would pack up, bring the last container across the lot, sit on the bench beside him while he ate, and they would talk. Not about big things, about food at first. The spice is different today, he said on the fourth day. I added more cloves, the plantain was riper than usual. Ripe plantain needs more spice to balance the sweetness. My wife used to say a good cook listens to the ingredient, not the recipe. Your wife is wise. A pause, she was. Akosua didn't push. She had learned that grief comes out when it is ready, and until then, you make room for it by not filling the silence. By the second week, the conversations went deeper. He asked about the cart. She told him how she started it, the plant in Etobicoke, the permit, the careful math of every month. You know your numbers, he said. I have to. There's no one else. Who do you support? She told him about Maame Afi, the medication, the clinic runs, the compression stockings, the weight of $900 a month that never got lighter. Mawuli listened without interrupting. She raised you alone, he asked. After my mother passed, I was 9. She could have sent me to my father's family in Kumasi. She didn't. She kept me, and then she brought me here. She gave up a great deal. She gave up everything, her business, her friends, her church. She came here for me. Akosua looked at her hands. Now it's my turn. Does she know you skip meals to pay for her medicine? Akosua looked away. She thinks I eat at the cart. Mawuli was quiet for a moment. So you lie to protect her. I let her believe something comfortable. That's different from lying. He almost smiled. It was the first time she had seen anything close to one on his face. No, it isn't, he said, but I understand why. She laughed, a real laugh, unexpected. It felt good. By the third week, Akosua learned pieces of Mawuli's past the way you learn a place by walking it slowly. His wife's name had been Inyonam. She had died 4 years ago. A stroke, without warning. We were supposed to travel to Cape Breton that summer, he said. We had never been. She had a photograph of the Cabot Trail on her phone, the one she kept meaning to use as her screen background. After she passed, I drove the whole trail alone. I stopped at every lookout. I took the same photograph. He stopped. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Because you haven't told anyone, Akosua said. He looked at her. That's usually why people tell things, she said quietly. He nodded. You're right. The man who ended it was named Conrad Fielding. He was 49, the kind of man who wore his watch on the outside of his cuff so people could see the face. He had recently acquired the property that included the community center parking lot through a numbered company, and he had plans for it. 62 condominium units, ground floor retail, underground parking. A project he called Ranee Modern and described in his pitch deck as bringing premium living to an underserved corridor. The food cart, in Conrad's estimation, did not fit the aesthetic. He appeared at Akosua's cart on a Thursday morning in late November, hands in his overcoat pockets, with a man from the city's bylaw enforcement office walking half a step behind him. Ms. Barima, Conrad said, reading her name from a clipboard. He did not say good morning. She kept her eyes on the plantain in the fryer. Can I help you? You're operating on private property. She turned to face him. I have an arrangement with the community center. I've been here for 3 years. The community center doesn't own this lot anymore. He produced a document. I do. The transfer was registered 6 weeks ago. Your arrangement, such as it was, is no longer valid. The bylaw officer shifted uncomfortably. He was a young man and he clearly did not want to be there. Akosua kept her voice even. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to relocate. You have 3 weeks. 3 weeks. She repeated it flatly. I'm being generous. He was already turning away. If you need an extension, apply through the city. And if I can't find another location in 3 weeks. He paused just long enough for her to know he had heard, but he didn't answer. He walked back to his car, a gray Audi, double parked, and left without looking back. Akosua stood at her cart. The plantain in the fryer was beginning to burn. She pulled it out. She plated it by reflex. She looked at the perfectly crisp edges and felt nothing. She had no savings to fight a property dispute, no lawyer on retainer, no family member who worked in city planning. She had a street vendor permit, a second-hand trailer, and a list of 11 regular customers who came back every single week because the food was that good. That night, she sat with Maame Afi at the kitchen table. She hadn't planned to say anything, but the look on Maame Afi's face, that old, perceptive look that had always been able to read her across any distance, made keeping it inside feel impossible. She told her everything. Maame Afi listened without speaking. When Akosua finished, the old woman reached across the table and covered Akosua's hands with both of hers. Do you remember what I said when the plane was landing? Maame Afi asked. Akosua thought, you said God brings you exactly as far as he means to bring you that day. Not farther, but also not shorter. Yes, Maame Afi squeezed her hands. We are not at the end of the road, my daughter. We are at the part of the road that bends. You cannot see around a bend. That does not mean there is nothing there. Akosua's eyes filled. Go to sleep, Maame Afi said softly. Tomorrow is still a day, and you have survived every yesterday. On the 41st day, Akosua set up her cart for the first time with no clear idea of where she would go when she left. She cooked with everything she had. She made the kelewele the way Maame Afi had taught her, with the ginger grated fresh, the way her grandmother's grandmother had done it in a village outside Kumasi where there were no refrigerators and no shortcuts and no reason to pretend you weren't doing your absolute best. She made the wakai from dried black-eyed peas she had soaked overnight. She made kontomire stew with the smoked fish that cost too much, and she put it in anyway, because if this was one of the last days on this corner, she was going to leave it having given everything she had. By 2 in the afternoon, the line was longer than it had ever been. Mrs. Yeboah from the community center came out in her coat half-buttoned. Akosua, what are you cooking? I can smell it from my office. Everything, Akosua said. Everything, Mrs. Yeboah repeated, looking at the line stretching to the sidewalk. Lord have mercy, give me 2 containers. By 5:30, she had 1 container left. She looked at the bench. Mawuli was there, same coat, same patience. She crossed the lot. He looked up when she sat beside him. You've been crying, he said. Not yet, she said, but I'm close. She told him about Conrad, about the 3 weeks, about the fact that 2 of those weeks had already gone and she had found nothing. No corner, no lot, no landlord willing to rent to a food cart on short notice in November. Mawuli listened. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He didn't say it would be fine. He just listened, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. The food you make, he said finally, what does it mean to you? She thought about it honestly. It's the way I speak when I don't have words. My grandmother taught me that. She said food is language. You can say things with a plate that you can't say any other way. Mawuli nodded slowly. He looked at the container of kelewele in his hands. Don't move the cart yet, he said. She looked at him. Mawuli, I don't have a choice. He owns the lot. Not yet, he said. Give me until Monday. She wanted to ask what Monday had to do with anything. She wanted to ask a great many things, but the way he said it, calm, certain. The way a person speaks, when they already know the answer to a question they haven't asked yet, made her stop. All right, she said, Monday. He nodded. He ate in silence. When he finished, he set the empty container on the bench beside him and looked at it for a moment. Akosua, he said. Yes? A tree does not eat its own fruit. She looked at him. He stood up. He walked to the corner of the lot and made a phone call, keeping his back to her. She watched him, this man in his old parka, and something about the way he held himself on that call, perfectly still, shoulders level, the posture of a man who had spent decades in rooms where posture mattered, made something in her go quiet with attention. On Monday morning, a black Cadillac Escalade pulled up to the curb on Ranee Avenue at 9:30. A woman in a gray blazer stepped out and held the rear door open. Mawuli stood from the bench. He brushed the light snow from his coat. He walked toward the car. And then he stopped. He turned around. He looked at Akosua, and when he spoke, his voice carried all the way across the lot in the cold November air. Your grandmother is right, he said. The road bends, but the road continues. He got into the car. Now, before I tell you what happened next, if you are watching this and you have ever given from the very bottom of what you had, if you have ever fed someone else while you yourself were hungry, this story is for you. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because here at Ancient African Folktales, we believe that the stories worth telling are the ones that remind you who you already are. What happened next was this. The Escalade did not drive away. After a moment, the woman in the gray blazer crossed the parking lot to where Akosua was standing behind her cart, too bewildered to do anything but hold a spatula. Mrs. Barima, the woman said, My name is Silorm. I work with Darko Holdings. My employer would like to speak with you. Darko Holdings. Akosua knew the name. Everyone in the Ghanaian community in Toronto knew the name. Darko Holdings was a real estate and private investment firm founded 30 years ago by a Ghanaian engineer who had arrived in Canada with a graduate scholarship and built one of the largest black-owned property companies in Ontario. They had developed mixed-income housing in Scarborough, community hubs in Brampton, a commercial district in Mississauga. The founder's name was Mawuli Darko. The man on the bench, Akosua said. Her voice came out strange. That's him. Yes, Silorm said. He sat on that bench for 41 days. He's done things like this before. When he needs to understand something, he goes where ordinary things happen. He says you cannot know a city from a boardroom. She paused. He says you cannot know a person from a resume. Conrad Fielding received a call that afternoon from his project financiers. There had been a development, a competing offer for the air rights above the Ranee Avenue property. A significant offer, enough to make Ranee Modern no longer the most financially rational use of the lot. And the adjacent property, the one Conrad had been counting on for underground parking access, had also changed hands. entering into a 15-year ground lease with the Lawrence Heights Community Center for a mixed-use development that would include affordable commercial kitchen space, retail units for community vendors, and a public courtyard. Without parking access, without the air rights, Ranee Modern was no longer viable. Conrad was not known for moving on, but he was known for understanding when a door had closed. For Maame, the change came first as a phone call. A referral. The best nephrologist at St. Michael's Hospital, the specialist Akosua had been trying to access for 2 years and kept hitting wait lists for. Suddenly there was an opening, and the medication that had cost $900 a month was now covered by a private benefit plan, arranged quietly through the Community Health Foundation that Darko Holdings had supported for the past decade. Akosua had not asked for any of it. Mawuli had simply made it happen, the way people who have real power do things, without announcement, without waiting to be thanked. When she confronted him about it, at the bench, where he still came some mornings, where she still brought him a container of kelewele, even though neither of them pretended anymore that he needed it, he looked at her with that patient face of his. "You kept the pot full for 41 days, he said, when your own pot was nearly empty. You don't think that deserves something back?" "I didn't do it for something back," she said. "I know," he said. "That's exactly why it does." The kitchen space in the new development opened the following spring. Akosua designed it herself, the layout, the equipment, the menu written in chalk on a dark board above the counter. She called it Maame table. On the morning it opened, she stood in the middle of a real kitchen, a real hood vent, a real industrial burner, a walk-in refrigerator, space to actually turn around without bumping into something, and made the first batch of kelewele the way she had always made it. Ginger grated fresh, cloves, a pinch of cayenne, ripe plantain chosen the evening before. When the first plate went out, she looked up for a moment and whispered, "This one's for you, Maame." And from the table by the window, Maame, who had arrived in her good coat and her church shoes and refused a wheelchair even though her knees protested all morning, said, "I'm right here, my daughter. Save the dedication for when I am gone." The whole room laughed. There is one more part to this story, the part that is hardest to tell and also the most necessary. 8 months after Maame table opened, Conrad Fielding came in on a rainy Wednesday evening, 15 minutes before closing. He looked different. The overcoat was the same, but something was gone from his posture. The Ranee Modern project had collapsed not just there, but had taken 2 others down with it in a financing tangle. There had been articles in the business press. His wife had gone to stay with her sister in Kingston. He was living in a serviced apartment on Bay Street. He stood near the door. He didn't approach the counter. Akosua saw him from the kitchen. She came out and looked at this man, the man who had arrived at her cart with a bylaw officer and told her she had 3 weeks, smiling the smile of someone who had never needed to count weeks. And she waited to see what she felt. What she felt was tired. Not of him, just tired in the way you get tired of holding something that is heavier than it is worth. "Mr. Fielding," she said. He looked up. His eyes were different. "I can't pay," he said quietly. I walked past and I smelled." He stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence. She went to the kitchen. She came back with a plate of wakai and Kantamire stew and a piece of fried tilapia, and she set it on the table nearest the door. "Sit," she said. He looked at the plate. He looked at her. "Why?" he said, just that one word. "Because you're here," she said, "and I have food. That's a good enough reason." The same words, the same grace, the same choice made the same way. Not because she had forgotten what he did, but because she was her grandmother's granddaughter. And her grandmother had taught her that carrying a stone for someone else does not punish the person who put it in your hands. It only makes your own hands heavy. Conrad sat down. He ate. He didn't speak. He came back the next week, and the week after. On the 4th visit, he asked if there was anything he could do, any way he could help. He said it while looking at the floor, which Akosua thought was the most honest she had ever seen him look. "Can you fix a drafty door?" she said. He looked up. "The back entrance," she said. "It lets in cold air all winter. The landlord keeps saying he'll send someone." Conrad looked at her for a long moment. "Saturday morning," he said, 8 o'clock. He was there at 7:45. He fixed the door. He also looked at the electrical panel and told her 2 breakers were undersized for the kitchen load and needed replacing before the cold came in properly. He arranged for his old electrician to come out the following week and do it, and he paid for it himself, and he said nothing about it until the invoice arrived with a 0 balance and a note that said only, "Saturday." Some lessons are taught in classrooms, some are taught by life, and some, the ones that change the shape of a person, are taught at a table with a warm plate in front of you and a woman who had every reason to turn you away choosing not to. As for Akosua and Mawuli, that is another story, one that moved more slowly than either of them expected and more certainly than either of them planned for. There was no grand gesture, no ring produced from a coat pocket in a dramatic moment. There were just 2 people who had learned to sit on a bench together in all kinds of weather, and who eventually understood that they did not want to sit apart. When Maame was told, she was quiet for a full minute. Then she looked at Mawuli with the particular scrutiny of a woman who has been reading people's character since before he was born. "Can you cook?" she asked. "No," he said honestly. "Good," she said. "Then you will stay out of my granddaughter's kitchen and let her work." Mawuli laughed. It was a full laugh, the kind that had been away a long time and came back changed, but came back. "Yes, Mom," he said. "And you will come to church," she said. "Yes, Mommy." "Every Sunday." "Yes, Mommy." She looked at him a moment longer. Then she gave a single nod, the kind that closes a matter, and turned back to her tea. On the windowsill behind her there was a small tin, the one that had held the biscuits on the flight from Accra to Toronto all those years ago, the one she had washed, and kept ever since and used for odds and ends. It was nothing, a dented tin with a faded lid. But it had made every crossing with them, from one life to the next, because Maame believed that you carry forward the things that held something good, even after the good thing itself is gone. Some containers are never really empty. The pot that feeds others, the one Maame had always said would never run dry, it was never just about food. It was about what you chose to do with what you had left, on the days when what you had left was almost nothing. It was about a bench in a parking lot on a cold October evening. It was about kelewele going cold in someone else's hands instead of warming yours. It was about Akosua, standing behind a second-hand cart on a corner in Scarborough, looking at the last container of the night and making a choice that she had no idea, in that moment, would change the entire shape of everything that followed. She didn't know, that's what made it real. Remember that. The next time someone beside you is hungry and you are almost out of everything yourself, don't calculate, don't wait, don't look away, because you never know who is sitting on that bench, and you never know what your last container might be worth.